The recruit stands frozen in the driveway, his fingers tightening around the cold metal of the rifle like it is the only thing holding him together. His eyes dart to the woman standing calmly a few steps away in her faded sweatpants and worn sneakers. Her hands are empty and relaxed, and her posture is straight but not aggressive. The recruit swallows and his Adam's apple bobs. He wants to laugh again, but the sound sticks in his throat. The dog on the neighbor's porch growls low, and the recruit notices that it is not a playful growl, but a warning. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, and the rifle wavers slightly. His thumb brushes against the safety, and he feels the tension in his wrist spike. The woman speaks softly, but the words cut through the thick summer air. Her voice is measured and even, and it carries the authority of someone used to being listened to without raising it. She tells him to lower the weapon slowly, and she repeats it a second time with her eyes locked on his. He feels a flicker of doubt that he cannot ignore. The bravado that carried him through the weekend disappears under the weight of her stare and the quiet strength she radiates. He remembers stories he heard in training about accidents and fatalities, but this feels different. This is not a classroom drill. This is not a game. The recruit tries to steady his breathing, and his vision blurs with heat and adrenaline. The metal barrel of the rifle feels heavier than it did an hour ago. When he picked it up in the safe room at the base, he remembers the drills about keeping your finger off the trigger, but it seems impossible to think about anything besides the woman and the way she is not flinching. She steps forward one slow step, and he steps back instinctively. His foot hits a cracked slab of concrete and he stumbles but catches himself. The rifle tilts and he grips it tighter. The woman does not flinch. She lets him regain his balance without making a move to intervene. She does not shout. She does not yell. She just waits like a predator that does not need to show its claws. The neighbor's car horn blares somewhere down the street and it echoes in the quiet neighborhood. The recruit flinches at the sound and almost jerks the rifle toward her. He feels his stomach tighten and a wave of nausea rises in his throat. He has never felt so exposed. He realizes he does not know what to do. He had imagined himself as strong and fearless and invincible, but right now, he feels like a child caught in a storm. He hears the woman inhale slowly, and he notices how calm she is compared to the chaos inside him. He wants to put the rifle down, but he does not trust himself to move. The woman tilts her head slightly, and her eyes narrow, not in anger but in calculation. She notices the way his weight shifts, the way his fingers tremble, the way his knees look ready to buckle. She has learned to read people quickly, and she sees that the fight in him is collapsing under his own fear. She speaks again, her words low and deliberate. She tells him to think about his family, about what his mother would feel if something happened. She tells him to remember the first day he arrived at training, and the excitement he felt, and the pride that came with the uniform. She lets the words hang in the air like a rope thrown across a gap. The recruit blinks, and his hands shake more violently. He swallows hard, and the rifle wavers dangerously. He wants to drop it, but he is afraid that moving too fast could make it go off. The woman takes another slow step forward, and the heat of the summer sun hits her face. She does not sweat. Her breathing is controlled, her movements are precise. She tells him again to set the rifle down, and this time she does not ask. She instructs. She watches the rifle tilt, and her eyes follow it, and she sees the tension in his jaw, the panic in his eyes. She senses the moment when he is about to break. He tries to speak, and the words come out as a strangled whisper. He says he does not know what to do. His voice is small and cracking. He admits that he was trying to prove something, and the woman nods slightly. She does not mock him. She does not ridicule him. She just lets him feel the weight of his own mistake. She steps closer again, and this time she is within reach. She extends a hand not to grab the rifle, but to signal calm. She lets him see that she is not going to strike. She is not going to yell. She is not going to escalate. She simply waits for him to realize that he must act. The recruit's knees shake and his arms tremble. He feels sweat run down the back of his neck. His heart pounds in his ears and he feels dizzy. He looks around and sees the neighbors peeking from behind. Curtains and half-open doors. The dog is still growling low and steady. He realizes the whole block is watching. He realizes the consequences of his actions could extend far beyond this driveway. He remembers every safety drill he ever ignored. He remembers every warning he dismissed. He feels the gravity of all of it at once. He wants to drop the rifle, but he cannot move. He feels paralyzed. The woman steps forward one last time and places her empty hands near his elbows. She does not touch the rifle. She does not make contact with him. She simply lets him feel her presence and the calm force radiating from her. She speaks softly about choices, about responsibility, about what it means to carry something that can end a life. She talks about the weight of that choice and the courage it takes to admit you are wrong. She talks about accountability and how fear can teach lessons faster than anger ever could. The recruit finally blinks and takes a shaky breath. He lowers the rifle, an inch, and then another. He feels every muscle screaming to keep it raised, but he forces himself to comply. He hears his own heartbeat thudding in his ears, and the woman notices how slowly he moves. She allows him to regain control over his limbs. Without rushing him, she keeps her gaze steady and unwavering. He feels as if he is in a pressure cooker and she is the valve allowing the steam to escape. He lowers the rifle until the barrel points at the ground and his hands tremble violently. The metal feels impossibly heavy, and he feels relief and fear mingling in a knot in his chest. The woman nods once and steps back to give him space. She does not speak immediately. She lets him process the moment. She watches his eyes scan the rifle, and then himself, and then the street. She sees recognition dawn in his expression, and the sudden understanding that he has been reckless. She does not celebrate. She does not gloat. She waits and observes. The recruit finally drops the rifle to the concrete, and it clatters loudly. The sound echoes down the street, and he flinches at it as if it were gunfire. The woman does not react. She lets the noise settle. She lets him absorb the finality of his actions. He feels dizzy and overwhelmed, feels tears stinging his eyes, but he swallows them down. He feels exposed in a way he has never felt before. He feels the fragility of life and the immediacy of responsibility. He feels that this moment will mark him for a long time. The neighbors start to step out slowly, watching from a safe distance. The dog retreats behind a gate and growls quietly, but the tension in the air remains thick. The woman bends slightly and picks up the rifle with care and professionalism. She checks that it is unloaded and then sets it safely aside. She keeps her eyes on the recruit as she does it, letting him see that control and responsibility are inseparable. She speaks finally and tells him that he must answer for what he almost did. That words and explanations alone are not enough. He nods quietly and realizes he cannot speak. Yet, time seems suspended in the driveway. The heat presses down. The sunlight glares off concrete and metal. He feels the weight of judgment, not from anger, but from calm awareness. He feels that he has been seen fully and that there is no hiding. The woman steps back fully now and gestures to the edge of the driveway. She does not rush him. She does not instruct him further. She simply allows the silence to convey the seriousness of the lesson. He understands without words and feels a mixture of fear and relief. He sinks slowly to the ground, letting his hands rest on his knees. He feels exhausted in a way that is physical and mental at the same time. He feels the adrenaline draining and the reality of what he almost did. Settling in his head pounds, and he realizes he has been given a second chance by someone who could have reacted very differently. He looks at the woman and sees no anger, only measured, calm. He feels gratitude tinged with shame and fear. The woman watches him for a long moment. She does not speak. She lets him gather himself. She lets him confront the fragility of his own choices. She knows that this moment may not change him completely, but it is a start. She knows that the lesson may echo in his mind for years to come. She knows that he will remember the quiet authority and steady presence that stopped a tragedy before it began. He finally speaks a whisper, and his voice trembles. He says he is sorry. He does not know how else to express the weight in his chest. She nods and does not answer. She lets him feel the significance of the apology. He sits back on his heels and breathes deeply, noticing every sound, every movement. Around him, noticing that the world did not end, but that it almost could have. The woman steps back fully now and allows the recruit to rise slowly. He notices the sweat on his brow, the trembling in his hands, the ache in his legs. He notices the rifle, lying safely aside. He notices the quiet streets, the watching neighbors, and the retreating dog. He notices that he has survived the moment, and that he has been taught something he cannot unlearn. She walks back toward her house, slowly and deliberately. Her movements are calm, controlled, and measured. She does not rush. She does not look back. The recruit watches her go and feels the emptiness of the space she leaves behind. He realizes that the lesson is ongoing, that it will not end with this moment, but will live inside him. He feels the heat of the sun and the weight of the day, and the quiet that follows the storm. He feels himself changed. The recruit stands in the driveway, his body stiff and awkward as he watches the woman retreat to her front door. She moves slowly, her steps deliberate and calm. He notices how controlled her movements are and how even her breathing seems steady. He feels a mix of relief and lingering fear as the adrenaline fades, leaving a hollow ache in his chest. He looks down at the rifle lying safely on the concrete and feels the weight of what could have happened pressing against his skull. His hands tremble slightly and he clenches them into fists, trying to steady himself. He hears voices from the neighbors' houses, some curious, some concerned, but none daring to step closer. He feels exposed, as if every glance is a judgment he cannot escape. He swallows hard and realizes he has never felt so small in his life. He thinks of his friends at the base, the stories they tell, the bravado, the jokes, the reckless acts he never thought could go wrong, and now he feels the stark reality of consequences. He wants to call someone. He wants someone to tell him it will be okay. But he knows it will not be okay. Not yet. The woman comes back to the driveway carrying a small notebook and a pen. She kneels to write something, and the recruit notices how methodical she is, how calm. She glances up at him briefly, and he sees in her eyes no malice, no gloating, only quiet observation. She does not speak, but the silence carries a weight. He feels compelled to respond, but the words die in his throat. He watches as she writes carefully, then closes the notebook and places it in her pocket. She steps closer and speaks softly, her voice calm but firm. She tells him that he will need to answer for what happened. She says that this is not about punishment, but about responsibility. She says that actions have consequences, and that ignoring them will only make them heavier. He nods slowly, his throat tight. He wants to protest. He wants to explain that it was a mistake, but the words feel hollow. He feels the truth of her words pressing against him. He realizes that nothing he says will erase the moment. She gestures toward the street and tells him to sit. He does so reluctantly, his knees weak from tension and exhaustion. He notices the heat of the concrete through his pants and the sunlight burning his neck. He looks at her and sees her stance relaxed but alert. She tells him to breathe slowly and to focus on what happened, not on what might have happened. She instructs him to recount the events from the beginning to the end without embellishment. He hesitates, and then begins speaking, his voice low and trembling. He tells her about the base, about the drills, about how he picked up the rifle, and how the thought of impressing others clouded his judgment. She listens without interruption, her gaze steady. Her eyes track his movements, and her mind catalogues the signs of fear, the hesitation, the mistakes. He speaks about the moment he raised the rifle, the laughter he tried to force out, and the instant he saw her calm face. He recounts how neighbors froze, and the dog growled. He tells her about the internal panic, the shaking hands and the nausea that hit him. He describes the surreal feeling of time stretching and contracting as if the seconds had become hours. She nods occasionally, acknowledging his honesty, but she does not offer reassurance. When he finishes, he slumps slightly forward, exhausted. She tells him to sit quietly for a few minutes and simply observe his surroundings. He obeys and notices the silence of the street, the subtle movements of neighbors behind curtains and the dog retreating behind a fence. He feels the emptiness of the moment as if the world is holding its breath. He realizes that no one else may ever understand the depth of fear he felt. He feels the enormity of his own recklessness and the responsibility to carry it forward in memory. After several minutes, she speaks again, her voice calm but insistent. She tells him that he must follow through with accountability. She explains that there will be legal and administrative consequences, and that ignoring them will only compound the problem. She instructs him to prepare to meet with the police and base officials. She emphasizes that honesty is the only way to preserve his integrity. He nods, feeling a lump in his throat and a tightening in his chest. He knows she is right. She leads him slowly to the edge of the driveway, keeping her eyes on him as he moves. He feels every step, as if the concrete were a tightrope over a pit. He notices her hands, relaxed at her sides, her posture steady and composed. She stops near the street and tells him that the police are on their way. She instructs him not to resist or hide anything and to cooperate fully. He swallows hard and nods again, the weight of compliance pressing heavily on his shoulders. The sound of sirens grows faintly in the distance, and he feels a pang of dread mixed with relief. He realizes that the moment of confrontation is over, but the consequences are just beginning. The woman stands silently beside him, watching his reaction. She does not speak, but her presence conveys both authority and protection. He feels a complicated mix of gratitude and fear. He wonders how someone could remain so composed while he nearly caused a disaster. When the officers arrive, he follows the instructions carefully. His hands are raised when requested. His voice shakes when asked questions, but he answers truthfully. He notices the woman explaining calmly to the police what happened, and the way her words are precise without exaggeration. She provides context without bias, and he feels a strange sense of security even under the scrutiny of law enforcement. He realizes that her experience has prevented a catastrophe, and that her intervention is what saved him from making the situation far worse. He answers questions about why he pointed the rifle. Her intervention had prevented escalation, but the accountability remains. He feels every mistake laid bare, and every lapse in judgment, weighing him down. The officers take notes and ask for details. He struggles to recall. He notices their serious expressions and feels the cold reality of potential consequences. She stands silently nearby, letting him face the process without shielding him. He appreciates her restraint and realizes that restraint can be a powerful lesson in itself. After the initial questioning, he is escorted to a police car, and the gravity of the situation settles fully in. His body trembles with fatigue and fear. He thinks about the Special Forces veteran who intervened and the calm authority that prevented a tragedy. He reflects on his own recklessness and the dangerous combination of pride and ignorance. He realizes that bravery without control is a liability and that humility can be life-saving. While waiting at the station, he reviews the events over and over in his mind. The details of his panic, the small shifts of the rifle, the timing of the veteran's steps replay like a film. He recognizes how quickly a moment can escalate into disaster. He thinks about the neighbors and the dog and the silence that held the tension together. He understands the weight of being responsible for something that could have ended a life. The veteran's presence is noted by the officers, and her credibility establishes a clear perspective of the incident. She speaks quietly to him about the importance of following through. She advises him to engage in counseling and to take firearms safety courses. She tells him that no one else may intervene next time and that understanding the consequences is essential. He nods and writes down the names and numbers she provides, realizing that this is part of the process of making amends and learning. Spends hours reflecting on the day, his mind tracing the narrow line between catastrophe and resolution. He realizes how quickly a misjudgment can spiral and how essential calm presence and experience are in managing danger. He thinks about fear and courage and the lessons that cannot be taught in classrooms. He feels the complexity of human behavior and the necessity of accountability. By the time he is released, he feels exhausted, yet changed. He walks back through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, noticing the ordinary details he had ignored before. The sun has shifted and the shadows stretch long. He feels a subtle but persistent hum of awareness in his chest. He thinks about responsibility and restraint, and the person who taught him both through action rather than words. He recognizes that the lesson will stay with him for the rest of his life. He looks back toward the driveway where the veteran's house stands, and he sees her tending to her garden as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He feels humility and gratitude. He understands that this is the essence of real courage, the ability to act decisively and calmly in the face of potential disaster. He feels the weight of the day and the sharpness of memory pressing into his consciousness. He knows he cannot undo the past, but he can carry forward the lesson. He walks slowly back to his own home, noticing every detail, the cracks in the sidewalk, the flutter of leaves in the wind, the distant hum of traffic. He feels grounded in the reality of his choices and the reality of consequence. He realizes that life can pivot in a moment, and that calm authority can prevent irreversible mistakes. He carries the lesson with him like a quiet burden, a reminder of the fragility of recklessness and the necessity of vigilance. At home, he sits quietly reflecting. He thinks of his family and the words he will need to speak to them. He thinks of the veteran and the presence she commanded without force. He thinks of himself and the narrow escape he experienced. He feels a persistent nervous energy that mixes with relief. He knows he must work to rebuild trust and understanding and to confront the patterns that led him to point.